put together what we're looking
Thank
at,
you.
the growth patterns here, Europe versus the United States, with what we're seeing in an increasing number of trade, if I can call it, disputes?
I think what you have is these trade tensions. They don't help. The multilateral system has ways in which it can deal with these things better. For example, on the specific issue of steel, which triggered these tariffs, we created in the G20 the Global Forum on Steel Excess Capacity to deal with the substance of the problem of steel excess capacity, not with the manifestations. You deal with the manifestations with these tariffs, and then you get tit for tat, you get retaliation. Whether you really have to sit down and talk about how do you actually reduce capacity in order to solve the problem, and so that this will not be a recurrent issue. That we created this in the G20, and in Hangzhou, we confirmed this in Hamburg last year. So we should first favor the mechanisms that we have created ourselves through multilateral approaches rather than through tariffs.
Well, as you say, there have been multilateral approaches. Actually, the United States led in that since World War II in developing those. We have a president of the United States right now who says specifically he is not a big fan of multilateral. He likes bilateral. If the president persists in his direction, and it certainly appears right now that he's going to do that, what effect could that have on trade and therefore on global synchronized growth?
The question is, how do you deal with international trade if not globally? I mean, how do you deal with global issues if not globally? How do you deal with investment flows if not through a multilateral mechanism? How do you deal with climate change if not through a multilateral mechanism? How do you deal with migration issues, cross-border issues, if not through a multilateral? So these things are, by definition, by their nature, have to be dealt with multilaterally in order to have any chance of being successful.
Yeah, let's turn to Germany quite specifically. I believe you just met with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. How concerned is she right now about the development with respect to the relations between the United States and Germany?
Well, first of all, Germany itself is doing very well. The economy is doing very well. It looks like it's going to be growing at about upwards of 2% for this year and next year. The unemployment numbers are very low, etc. But it's not just Angela Merkel. I mean, everybody was worried about the outcome of the G7 meeting in Canada. Of course, because you're looking at two of the pillars of multilateral governance, one having to do with the G7 for the most developed countries, the other one for the G20. And of course, the G7 moves into the G20, which is in next November. This was not a good moment, let's say, of international cooperation. And we really have to get back on the right track. Again, multilateral is the way to go, sometimes the only way to go in many of the issues that are in the international agenda. Cooperation is the best response.
What about going forward, though? I want to show you a chart here on the Bloomberg terminal angle, which takes a look at the German survey expectations is that white line. It's now moved into negative territory versus the German current situation. Yes, it's a sentiment indicator, but you could argue it's more forward-looking. How do you explain that?
What happens is that you can't base policy on the expectations of the day or even of the expectations of the month. Some of these graphs or some of these, the temperature, where you take the temperature of the mood is recurrent. And then sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. What I would say is that the German economy itself is doing very well. And the objective indicators are doing very well. They're getting more exports. They're selling more. They're importing more. The only question is, yes, Germany is a very large, open economy, which depends to a very great extent on how open the rest of the economies are. To the extent that there are protectionist pressures or protectionist sentiments, of course, then the expectations will suffer.
And I guess to wrap up, the last question is, a week ago we would have been talking the whole time with you about Italy and the ramifications there. What do you see going forward for Italy, and how big of a concern it will be in the Eurozone?
What happens with Italy is one more manifestation. It took 7 months to create a government, to form a government in the Netherlands. It took 5 months to create a government here in Germany. We have this result in Italy. We have the result in the very recent events in the case of Spain, for a very great fragmentation in all these cases of the political votes and the political preferences. You have Brexit. You have a number of, and then you have uncertainties having to do with the Mexican elections and the Brazilian elections. You even had the Malaysian elections, which was somewhat unexpected. So all over the world, what you have is a lot of dissatisfied people, a lot of angry people saying, I don't like what I see there. I don't like what I got. I don't like my share of this. I'd like to change the system. The only problem, when it gets even worse, is when, like in Brexit, 60% of the youth whose future was at stake didn't show up to vote, which I'm sure they regret that, because it's not only that they don't like the system, some of them are giving up on the system, and that is very dangerous indeed. We have to deliver. Globalization has to deliver. Multilateralism has to deliver.